been following these guys and listening. And Kevin and Karen, I can talk about you all day. We love you. We bless you. We thank God for you. And you're going to hear what Karen's doing. If you haven't read her book, you have to get her book. They have books out there. There'll be books on the book table right outside the door afterwards. Please buy their book, Infected. Karen's book, Infected. It is amazing. And it will get you through the disease. Amen? I believe it. So, Kevin, Karen, come. Did you get your mic? You got our mic right. Okay, great. You want me to shut up now? Is that what you said?
It's so good to be with you folks. Thank you so much, Pastor Ed and Mona. We have been connected to your church probably 27 years, counting the time that we were part of when the Kilpatricks were pastoring the part, the one that before it merged, and they were actually in this building at that time, right? They weren't? Okay. Buildings changed. Hard to keep track. But we feel so blessed to be connected. And really, your pastors are so wonderful to just really want relationship. We have so many churches and even just individuals or businesses that they're happy to, of course, support and pray, but we have very little relationship. But it's different here, and we really value that and appreciate that. But we have been ministering full-time, mostly overseas, since 1989, so about 32 years. And most of that was focused on China. Initially, that's where we had that call, and we packed up and moved to communist China, which is a very interesting lifestyle. And we have a great advantage because of that experience to see communism is actively taking hold of our nation now. It's not hard to see, even if you didn't live in China, but we can easily just say, and we've been seeing it, for a long time, but it's hard to get people stirred. So thankfully, like Lance said, the church is finally waking up, and people are finally waking up to stand up. But we focused on China a lot, ministering to university students initially for about 12 years. That was the main focus, evangelizing, discipling, and raising up believers there secretly in China, because the communist government doesn't allow freedom of religion. And then God started opening up other opportunities. We started going more into the underground churches in China, providing marriage seminars, pastor seminars, reaching children and poor kids. China began to relax and open up more. We had more and more freedom. The church there had more and more freedom, which was great, until this current leader stepped in, and he likes the old-style communist dictator control, destroy religion, destroy anything that he can't totally control. So that has changed things, and we didn't quite see it coming as quick as God did, but God had us already starting to change and incorporate other nations. I've been going to Cambodia and Vietnam as well, serving churches and pastors there. And it's been great. And recent few years, God really started stirring Karen to reach out and get involved more in understanding our political situation in America for the purpose of praying over our leaders and praying over our nation. And God's been stirring her more and more to be involved in that. So our ministry went from being just a China-focused ministry to the nations in general, mostly Asia, and including the U.S., especially prayer over our political realm. So we just thank you for being involved. Thank you for your prayers, those that have known us and received. If you want to be on our mailing list, just let me know, and I can put you on our email or paper newsletter list. The church receives those, and I will be out back afterwards with the book. Karen will tell you a little more about it, but she's got the main word for today, so she would like for me to turn it over to her probably now. So please welcome my beautiful wife, Karen Hardin.
Okay, so as Kevin said, he kind of gave a background of who we were. Some of you guys knew us as China Call. But where I started getting involved with government is I was never involved with that. My mom would have talk radio on when I was a kid, and I'm like, can we turn on music? Just as my kids do nowadays. And so I just honestly just wasn't involved. And even as I got older, I would say I really wasn't all that involved. I just wasn't. And I'm sorry for that, but that's just the way it was. And so about 2015, before Trump got into office, he was just a candidate. My mom was this major pro-Trump person, and I'm like, talk to the hand. I was one of those that would have been a never Trumper, although that term was not coined at that point. And if you read my book, I talk about that because I didn't get it. And he came to the Mabee Center at ORU. It was filled with all of my Christian friends and some of the pastors that were taking pictures with him. And I'm like, seriously? Do you guys not know who this man is? And I was just so frustrated by the whole thing. And I don't know if any of you guys will admit that you were at that place, but I was. And so I get it when these people say, do you not know who he was? I'm like, yeah, I do. And so what? He's an imperfect man, like the rest of us. And so, at that point, I didn't vote for him when he was, when we had all of the Republicans running, which was a bazillion. I didn't vote for him. I voted for Dr. Ben Carson, knowing Ben couldn't win, but I really valued his stand. And so I voted for him. He didn't win, no surprise. And then he endorsed Trump. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I don't know if any of you guys read what he wrote, but he said he's a godly man. He's a humble man. Humble man. I didn't see that at all. He started naming all these qualifications about him. I'm like, are we talking about the same guy? Because I don't see this. And so I sat in my car and I began to weep. I weep as I tell this. I said, God, show me what I'm missing because I don't get it. And as I sat there, God said to me immediately, he said, then you need to shut up. Because I was talking bad about Trump. I was just criticizing him because there were a lot of things to criticize. Can we just be honest? And so I was more than happy to do that. But when you sit there and criticize somebody all the time, you can't see the other side. I was infected, okay? And we'll talk about this just briefly, but this is not my message today. And so as I began to do that and I prayed, I shut up. I wouldn't say anything good, bad, or ugly. I just prayed. And it took about 2 or 3 months, but I'm telling you, it was like a veil was removed. And all of a sudden, I could see what Dr. Carson was talking about. I honestly saw President Trump, who became President Trump. I did vote for him for the president, but by then my heart had changed. And my heart only changed because why? I humbled myself and I said, God, show me from your perspective. And that's really what we need to be doing right now. Because maybe there's some in here that voted for Biden. Maybe everybody voted for Trump. I know for me, on Inauguration Day, I was just very sober. I wouldn't even talk to anybody. I stayed in my office. Kevin came in 2 or 3 times. You okay? You okay? Like, I wanted to say. Because I was grieving. And so really what I've had to grapple with and where this message comes from is, what is our response? Are we supposed to submit to all governing authorities? Because I can tell you that was the very first thing I was hit with by some of the organizations I write for. They're like, but we need to submit to the governing authorities because all the governing authorities are there by God. Okay? So the scripture talks about that. So there's 2 things I want to look at today. Biblical and constitutional. We have 2 things that govern us. Okay? Now, the Bible is always the first. We need to realize that. It trumps everything. But our Constitution is there also. But you know what? They agree. All right? Romans 13, 1-2. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. That seems pretty cut and dried, doesn't it? So why are we even talking about it? Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So it seems like all authority is there by God, and those that exist are established by God. So that's what I've been told by some, is you need to get over it. Biden is there. He was there because this is God's will. Now, the only way we can look at that is we have to compare the Bible to what? The Bible. And so that's what we're going to do here today. So does that mean we are to submit to Biden? And if so, then let's look back at all leaders. Do we submit to Hitler in the 30s? Do we submit to Pharaoh? Okay, so let's go back to when Romans 13 was written. And that was written by Paul to the first century church That was back in about 56 AD when Nero was in. Now, Nero was in there for many years, ruling Rome, and he wasn't the despot that he was in 56. By the time 65 AD came, he was demonic, okay? But Paul's writing this back in 56, 57 AD. He was writing to the first century church, and he's talking to them because within the church, they were not submitting to Nero. And so we don't even know, it doesn't tell us. I've gone back historically to find out what specifically he was speaking into, and so we don't know. But we do know that he was speaking to the church, you can't just do your own thing. And that still applies to us today. We can't just do our own thing, okay? So hear me where I'm coming from. We're not here to just do our own thing. But Paul, who wrote that, later refused to submit to the Roman authority. So was Paul in rebellion to the gospel that he had written? Okay, so let's take a look at that. If we look at it from that standpoint, then you have to ask, was Moses in rebellion against Pharaoh, in an ungodly rebellion? What about Daniel when he ignored the king, when the king said you can't pray? You can only pray to the king. You couldn't pray to anybody else for 30 days. Do you remember that? And what about the Hebrew midwives? Or what about the disciples of the early church? Were they all in rebellion and thus subject to judgment? Peter and John, they were brought before the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders of the day, for doing miracles. And it said, "What are we going to do with these men?" The Sadducees asked, "Everyone living in Jerusalem knows they have performed a notable sign, and we cannot deny it. But to stop this thing from spreading any further among the people, we must warn them to speak no longer to anyone in this name." We really see the point of it there. To stop this from spreading further. Is that a godly mandate or an ungodly mandate? So they called Peter and John in again and commanded them not to speak or to teach at all in the name of Jesus. And Peter and John stated what we need to understand today. Which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him? You be the judges. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and what we have heard. Now that to me really states when we try to but determine where are we going to stand. God's laws always trump earthly laws, and that should always be our mandate. So what if they command us to close our churches and quit meeting together? What if they forbid us to worship together, just as they did to the early church? They've already done that. Okay? So do we understand? Now, I wouldn't have wanted to be a pastor back in March when they started shutting everything down. Let's just say, before we all start throwing stones, that was very hard. We've never walked this road before. And so we have to give grace when we go back a year later and go, well, that was stupid. All right, none of us had the knowledge that we have now, all right? And so I know for every pastor I was talking to that were friends, it's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? They're like, I don't know what we're supposed to do. And so many of them complied because why? It was for our safety. And so in order to protect the sheep, which is what pastors do, many went ahead and shut down their churches because they were told this is going to protect your sheep. But I know many pastors, after about 30 days, because it just kept being extended, were we helping the sheep or were we hurting the sheep? Well, let's look at that. People began walking away from God. They began to walk away from their faith. They were discouraged. Suicides began to happen. And at that point, many pastors went to say, I'm not protecting my sheep. I'm hurting my sheep. And so what did they do? They defied the law of the land, and they began to open up their churches. Are we supposed to always submit to authority? No. We're supposed to submit to God's authority. All right? So Daniel faced this charge back in his day. In Daniel 6, it says, "Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps that by his exceptional qualities, the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God.' The royal administrators, prefects, and satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. So what did they do? They made an ungodly action legal. Now, just because something is legal does not mean it's godly. So I've heard many people say, well, abortion's legal, so, it's the law of the land, we have to submit to it. Really? Since when does legalizing murder make it right? Okay, let's take that into the election. It is now legal because that Biden is in office because the votes were certified. But let's just say, how many of you guys watched the Mike Lindell video? Okay, if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. You can't find it on YouTube anymore because, of course, they brought it down. Many of the places it was up, they brought it down because they don't want you to find it. But you can find it on michaeljlindell.com. And he states, state by state, where they stole the vote. Now, we have to realize, too, with the justices, people will say all the time, they've said it to me, there was not enough evidence. That's why he's not novice, there was not enough evidence. Okay, that's not what the justices said. They didn't say there was not enough evidence. Did you know not a single justice opened the evidence? Not a single one. They never opened the affidavits or evidence. They never based it on that. What they based it on was standing. And what standing means was they found some legality that they could say, we're going to pass this on to the next court. Because what? They passed it on to somebody else. They didn't want to be held accountable. Because what do we see now? With the Democrats and the liberals, they're going to persecute you if you stand for righteousness. So all the justices became cowards, and they're like, we're going to pass it to the next group. We're going to pass it to the next group. So I'm sure you, like me, had high hopes when it came to the Supreme Court. Thank God Amy Coney Barrett is in there, right? We are going to see them stand for righteousness. And what happened? They refused to look at the evidence, okay? And so here we see what happens when you play to that. So they played to the king, and they said, you should issue an edict. You should make it legal that anyone who prays and follows after God, your majesty. So they're bowing down to him. They're making it all about this pride thing. So they tapped into the king's pride. All right? So what was Daniel's response to this legality and in whether he was going to honor the king? He honored the King of Kings. He continued to pray openly and publicly. So that same spirit is what we see in the current administration, okay? We have to look at what caused them to try and get Daniel thrown into the lion's den. All right? They played on the king's pride, and they tried to issue a legal mandate. And people will always go back and say, but this is legal. This is legal. Okay, well, it may be legal, but it doesn't make it right. So the root behind a tyrannical government and tyrannical leaders begins with pride and jealousy. Okay, we've had coup attempts happen. Let's go back to the original coup attempt. That's when Satan tried to overthrow God. And how did he do it? It was pride. It goes back to Isaiah 14. He said, I will arise to heaven. I will establish my throne. There were 5 I wills that he stated, and it was all based on pride because why? He was jealous of God. All right? It's based on greed and power. What do we see in our government now? Do we see humility? What do we see? Greed. A $2 million stimulus packet that's going to what? Tap into our dollars to give them to everything they want to give it to except the American people. This is about greed and power. This is about money. Okay, so this is my little pitch on the book. If you don't have it, it talks extensively. This is not about politics. Understand, this is not about liberals and conservatives. It is not about who you voted for. I do bring up some political things just because I use them as stories. But this is about whether you're infected. And let me tell you, we have all been infected at one time or another. It's based on pride, and pride can come in. You can get free of it one day, and it tries to get back in the very next day. And so there's a test in the back of the book that you can run through. Just ask yourself some questions to find out if you've got some trigger areas or if you know somebody. But I tell you what, there are 7 stages of progression. The last one is always insanity and death. How many times a day have you said, are they insane? They are, because they've gone through all 7 stages of the virus. And what you have to make sure is that you are not in those stages. So I really encourage you, if you don't have a copy, to get it. It's a very easy read, short chapters. I'm not one of those really educated people that write at this really deep level. That's just not me, but I think it works because most people don't read at that level. So there you go. All right, so does the Bible contradict itself? So we go back to Romans 13 and we look at it, because again, you have to compare the Bible to itself. So you have all of these biblical leaders that are expounded on that did what? They came against the authority of their day, but not always. They only did it at certain times. So Romans 13 says, if we go back to it, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for good. So what is the criteria the Bible establishes so that we will know if they are an authority that is established there by God? Because it says all authority is there by God, but then this is the next verses following it. It says there will be no terror for those who do right, but only for those who do wrong. That to be free from fear of the one in authority, do what is right, and you will be commended. Then you will know that is God's servant for good. So this is the criteria on how to determine this. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So that's how you know, are they God's servant? They bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So let's take that and let's look at another verse, because remember, you compare the Bible to the Bible. 1 Peter 2:13-17. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Says it again, every human authority, whether to the emperor as to the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. So we are submitting to those who punish evil and commend righteousness. Do you see? That is what God's criteria is. So let's compare those scriptures to China's government. Is their president God's servant for good? Well, he killed and removed those who opposed him after taking office. I don't know if you know that, but all the leaders that were around him that he thought could cause him problems, he immediately had them killed or removed, okay? He changed the laws in China so that he can never be removed from power. So it's almost like their laws are set up different than our laws. But like in America, a president can't serve past 2 terms, right? 8 years. But, so in China, they had their own laws. He has removed them. Their religious persecution increased, which you've always had that in China. But I will say when we first got in China in 89, it was really, really bad. Then you went through some presidents that really, they backed off of it a whole lot. And now you have President Xi, who is worse than probably Mao, in my opinion. And so the religious persecution has gone into the Uyghur group. Those are the people in the Western China. They're basically just slaughtering them. Now, so are we to say that God allowed President Xi to get in there and that this is God's plan and purpose? That would be ridiculous, isn't it? China is currently one of the foremost human rights abusers in the world. And who's governing America right now? China. So are Chinese believers to submit to this authority? And I'm talking about China because we've worked there for 30 years, okay? We know the language, especially Kevin. I don't speak it so well now, but we know the language, we know the culture, we know what's happening there. We're talking with Chinese believers on a regular basis. And I can tell you what, the American church has a lot to learn from the Chinese church. So is that God's servant for good? I think we can easily see that President Xi does not meet the criteria of Romans 13 for being God's servant for good. So remember, that is no terror for those who do right. Are the Chinese pastors in terror of what they do that is right? Yeah, of course they are. To be free from fear of one authority, then do what is right, and you will be commended. They're not commended. They're persecuted. Their legs are broke. Their churches are burned down. You know, and I'm not even, the other minority groups and other religions there, not just Christians, are attacked. So let's look at Biden's government. Are Christians to submit to this new authority? Because I'm told I'm supposed to. I'm told I need to back off. I need to walk away. Do I not understand what's going on? Well, yes, I understand what's going on. I'm wondering, do they understand what's going on? So is Biden in office God's judgment on America? How many of you have heard that? Yeah, that's what I've heard. I was told actually that Biden in his office because it's judgment on America for Trump's pride and for Trump supporters who worshiped him. Now, I don't know about you, but I just told you I was like a never Trumper. I did not worship the man. I can tell you, I did not worship the man. And like most of you, he would say things and I'm cringing, going, just. But you know, he was who he was. He came from Queens. He was a street fighter. If you backed him into a corner, he was going to come out with both fists. And that's what made him who he was. And so I'm not going to sit there and criticize that. But can we, how many of you guys would say that God put President Trump in office? Okay. So if we're going to say that, why do we feel that way? Because we felt like he was going in to clean up and especially to go after abortion. So does it make sense now that God would remove him and judge him for doing those things and putting Biden in there? I mean, does that even make logical sense? Okay, I don't think it does either. So let's look at the first 2 weeks of Biden's administration. He removed the restrictions on abortion that were put in place by the Trump administration. He refunded Planned Parenthood with tax dollars to increase murder in the womb. Well, the last I saw, it said, "Thou shalt not kill." Just saying. I've had a doctor that has come onto my Facebook page that has said over and over that Jesus never talked about abortion. And I'm like, yes, he did. He talked about murder. She said, well, they're not the same. Okay, that's a reprobate mind. If you don't see that abortion is murder, you don't understand the very basis because somebody doesn't come out of it alive. Did God put Trump in office only to remove him and put someone in office who would undo every piece of legislation in 2 weeks that returned us to a godly foundation? If God did that, then God's bipolar. No, I mean, I'm serious, really. Because it means, well, I was thinking this, but now I'm thinking this. What does it say about people that are double-minded? Is God double-minded? We know that he's not, okay? So within the first 2 weeks, he also remanded the transgender agenda of the Obama administration in bathrooms and sports, which forces females to share gym rooms and take showers with men. Okay, well, what does God say? What does he talk about? We are supposed to protect that. And then for unjustly amount men to compete with women, there was a fighter a woman, she was at the top of her game, and she was fighting against a transgender. So she was fighting against a man. And within 1 or 2 hits, he shattered her eye socket, ended her complete career. And she said afterwards, I have never felt so overpowered in my life. Well, because she's fighting a man. Let's just be clear. He's also turning the District of Columbia into the 51st state. That's simply to put more Democrat senators in there. He's restored the Obama administration with Iran, that within the last week, they've now said they are very close to nuclear power. He's restored the Obama administration with Muslim terrorist Hamas. Now again, God would be bipolar if he was behind this, because Hamas has said their sole goal is to what? Take out Israel. What did God say about Israel? These are the apple of my eye. So if God ordained this, then again, he's bipolar. They are also working to remove the dark forces of racism and domestic terrorism. Sounds great until you realize the domestic terrorists they're referring to is us. Exactly. So are these godly agendas? Let's just use our brains when we read the Bible. That's simply what I'm asking. We know that, one, I want to be very clear, God is not bipolar. He is not double-minded. And he never contradicts himself. So it means we just have to dig a little bit. So did God allow Trump to become president to remove these ungodly agendas just to put Biden in to revamp them? So if we say God allowed it, so it must be his will, then we have abdicated our role. let's look at this constitutionally now, because I'm telling you the two agree. Why do the two agree? Because our founding fathers based the Constitution on the Bible. So according to the 10th Amendment of our Constitution, the original Bill of Rights, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So who should be in control here? The states and the people. What do we see in control now? The federal government. Okay? So already we're off of our own Constitution. The powers delegated, this is the same part of the Constitution. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. That's what I want you to get. So the federal government is few and defined powers. Those which remain are for the state governments, and they are numerous and indefinite. Does our government sound like that right now? No. The former, the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. That's what they're there for, okay? With which the power of taxation at will, for the most part, will be connected. So what did the founders state? The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Now that was from James Madison. He was considered the chief architect of the Constitution, and that is in Federalist Paper number 45. Well, a lot of us go, what the heck is Federalist Paper, right? Okay, well, this is what it is. It is commonly referred to as the Federalist Papers. It is a series of 85 essays, and so these were written under the name Plubius in the paper, but it was actually Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, and they were written from 1787 to 1788. So these showed up in New York State newspapers because what they had was a constitution that they were replacing with the new Constitution. So they were talking to the people. They used the media as their form of communication, which is typically what the government has done. And so what we learned is they used it in lobbying for adoption of the Constitution over the existing Articles of Confederation, which is what was in place at that time. The essays explain particular provisions of the Constitution in detail. And the Federalist Papers are commonly used today to help interpret the Constitution. So if a lawyer goes into court and they're trying to, or the Supreme Court, they're trying to see if this is constitutional, what do they refer to? The Federalist Papers. So I'm going to refer to the Federalist Papers because these are our founding fathers. This is what they were thinking when they wrote the Constitution. So according to Section 1, Article 8 of our Constitution, it says, the federal government had few and defined powers where the states, which they considered sovereign governments within themselves, sovereign nations, they had the authority to be numerous and indefinite. Our founding fathers believed that the government closest to the people, meaning where they lived within their states, where they worked, where they behaved, where they raised their families, that was to be the strongest place of government. The federal government was when they all came together to fight against what? England, tyranny. That was the reason they came together, because they were doing fine individually, but they realized there was a reason to come together collectively. Our government was established so that the states, which were each individual sovereign nations, which united together to resist England, would not be stripped of their power by the Constitution. It was a provision to allow them to work together, keeping the authority of our state sovereign. So what happened is we saw that power-hungry federal leaders wanted more and more power. So what they began to do is to siphon off power from the states. And how did they do that? Money. Yep. And so they said, you know, we have some governors who really have been very dismal in running their states. And I'm thinking New York and California right off the bat. They've never balanced their budget. Can we just say they have been in the red pretty constantly? Because they're constantly using their money for the wrong things. And so if you go back and actually you look at the fires that were all started, not conspiracy theory, but they ignored what was told them to do to protect their own forests, and then fires were started, and it is proved that they were arson. They were started, and then what did they do? They say, we've got an emergency here, we need federal dollars. Okay? That's not conspiracy, that's fact. And so the federal government says, well, yeah, we'll give you money, but you have to give us some of your authority. And so state after state has given over authority because they want money. They have been unable to lead well. So let's remember why America was originally established. It was established to be free of the tyranny of England. We have to look at our Constitution, just like the Bible, we have to compare the Bible to itself. We have to compare our history, why the Constitution was created, the time frame in which it was created, and what they were thinking. Most of our founding fathers, contrary to what you hear in today's history, they were Christians. Even those who weren't Christians referred to the Bible as their foundation. So it doesn't make any sense to not work from that platform. Our founding fathers understood what a tyrannical government looked like, and they put within our Constitution preventatives. So James Madison said in 1798, in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of evil. Our governors, our states, we the people, are duty bound to stop the progress of evil. People ask me all the time, it's like, well, what do we do now? We stop the progress of evil. So let me just say, for all of those who began to go, you need to just accept the Biden administration, we need to offer them our congratulations. Well, let me ask you this. If a thief comes into your house and he steals all your goods, and then you see him later walking on the street, are you going to go, thank you so much, congratulations, you got my stuff? That's stupid. So when we congratulate Biden for a theft, Alexander Hamilton stated in the Federalist paper of number 33, if the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority, which we've just established they have, okay, and make a tyrannical use of its powers, the people, that's us, whose creature it is, they're talking about the Constitution being the creature, must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measures to redress the injury done to the Constitution as the exigency or urgent situation, we don't use that word, urgent situation may suggest and prudence justify. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, I just want to be really clear here. Tyrant or tyrannical use of powers means an absolute ruler unrestrained by law or constitution, a usurper of sovereignty. So what have we established? The Constitution was created to make the states sovereign nations. The federal government has usurped its authority to say, we are the main authority, and you guys have to submit to us, meaning the governors and the people. What did we see with Trump? When you saw Oregon burning, Washington burning, why didn't he send in the National Guard? Wasn't his job. The job of the governors. So he told them, you can ask for my help, but because of pride, they didn't want to ask for his help. They didn't call in. They didn't use the authority granted to them because either one, they didn't realize it, my people perish for lack of knowledge, or they were too prideful, or they were in alignment with the fact that their states were getting burned to the ground. So I'm not going to presuppose any of it, but you have to look at it and go, something was very messed up there, okay? So we are now under what? A tyrannical government. They've usurped their power. And let's look at Biden's 42 executive orders in his first 2 weeks of office. By his own admission, he said in October during the debates, he said, you cannot legislate by executive order. Those who do so are dictators. An executive order, 42 in 2 weeks, is more than any other president has ever done, okay? And so by his own statement, he is a dictator. The presidents are not to create laws. That's the job of Congress. He has usurped his authority. And so thus, by definition, we are under a tyrannical government. And so are we to submit to such authorities based on Romans 13? And who are the authorities established in our Constitution? So we can see based on Romans 13, are they acting as God's servants for good? No, they're not. And who are actually the leaders of our government? It says we're to submit to them. Absolutely, we are. Okay, we don't realize that. We elected them. Who are what? Servants for good. In Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in 1863, so this was during the Civil War, he said, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or distract, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Right there, again, he understood. 1, we are a nation under God. 2, it is by the people, for the people. Okay? Do we see that in our government today? No. We need to remember the American government was created for us, not to control us, destroy us, dominate us, or steal from us. It was established to break off the yoke of tyranny. So what do we do now? Is our role just to pray? No, absolutely. And where do we see that? Again, I'm going to show you in the Bible. Okay? We pray and take action. This is about courage versus cowardice. We are the leaders of this nation. Those in government are there to serve us. And so let's go back to the Constitution and what it said. Let's go back to the Bible. Sovereign state leadership is what was established for our government. Godly governors need to rise up and take back the authority given to them. Pastors, which also the religious leaders of our day, they need to rise up and take back the authority given to them. You know, back in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s, you had pastors that would get up, they would preach to their sheep, they would give a message from the Bible, then they would get up and they would talk about the current day events. And then they would take off their robes, they would grab their musket and say, "Who's with me?" They were called the Black-Robed Regiment. This is our history. And so when they say separation of church and state, it's a complete and utter lie. Because pastors, their role is to what? Protect and provide for the sheep. How do you protect the sheep if you're not going to talk about what's going on in daily affairs? That's not protecting. If the sheep have to go to church and then they're going, "But Pastor, I don't know what to do about this." Psst, I can't. That's politics. I can't talk about that. Okay? Well, where have pastors taken federal dollars to be silenced? Nonprofit status. So if you've been silenced because of nonprofit status, you've simply been bought off by the government. You should need to not care. It doesn't matter if we have nonprofit status. Is God the provider or is the federal government the provider? Thank God you have a pastor that is not going to kowtow to that. He called me one time, we were talking about what legally a pastor can do. But I loved his words. It's like, it doesn't matter for me. I've already made my decision. That's a Black Robe Regiment pastor. That's one that's here to protect the sheep, not just kowtow to the government. There is no separation of church and state in our Constitution. They'll tell you it is. It's not. Where did that come from? It came from Thomas Jefferson. He was talking to the Danbury Baptists, so it's called the Danbury Letters. And what he was talking to them about, because remember, you have to understand, our founding fathers understood what it was to be under a tyrannical government, England. And so he was very concerned about the government that had been established here, that he did not want the government to encroach upon the church. Well, how do the Democrats frame it? One, they make you think it's in the Constitution. And exactly, they make us think that the church is not supposed to encroach upon the government. That's not what it was about at all. It was the reverse. And what do we see happening? You have to close your church. You can't worship. You need to wear your masks. You can't talk. What is that? That's the government encroaching upon the church. We have a pastor in our city who closed down his church for about 30 days. And then after that, he got up in the pulpit because the Holy Spirit got hold of him. He got up in his pulpit and he apologized to his church. And he said, "I will never do that again." He said, "I will never do that again." He said, "I apologize for doing it." He said, "They will never shut us down again. God is my higher authority." So when our mayor called him and said to him, our mayor was trying to go to the church pastors of larger churches to try and get them to enforce the mask mandate. And so he said to him, will you enforce it? He said, well, let me ask you this, Mayor. He said, when you mandate that all abortions should stop, he said, I'll mandate that my congregation needs to wear masks. And then he said, I'm not encroaching upon the government. He said, this isn't the church going into politics. He said, politics came into the church. We need to understand exactly what this is. The problem is we removed God, prayer, and morality from our nation. President John Adams told us in 1798, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. So why are they trying to remove our Constitution? They say it doesn't work anymore. Well, you know what? They're right. Because if you remove morality and religion from our Constitution, it doesn't work. And so it is wholly inadequate to govern any other. So they've established, we have tyrants now in our government who have tried to remove God from our nation, tried to remove prayer, and now are trying to remove us. And they're saying the Constitution doesn't work. Well, now we know why. In 2009, President Obama stated, we do not consider ourselves a Christian nation at all. I was offended by that statement. Because we are a Christian nation. We were established as a Christian nation, and they're teaching in our schools we were not. That's a complete lie. And so no wonder our government is completely screwed up, and we have let them. Now, looking back over Obama's administration, we'd never walked that road before either. We had a man there who... Where do I want to go here? His own grandmother said he was born in Africa. All right? He says he wasn't. But he refused to let anybody look at his birth certificate and spent millions of dollars of George Soros's money to keep people from doing that. All right? So why not just let us look at your birth certificate? And so finally, the one that came out, if any of you knew, it didn't match the numbers of the other children that were born in the hospital, that same day. The numbers didn't match. So believe what you will, but that couldn't be an authentic birth certificate because the numbers didn't match. All right? So, but did we know what to do? No. So what did we do? We submitted because we're told in Romans 13 we submit to all authority, and it must be God, right? Because we didn't know better. Okay, fast forward, we've got 8 years. Then we had Trump, and now we're back to that same type of administration. Are we going to be stupid again? Because that's what I have to ask. Now, we didn't know what to do during the Obama years. Do we know now? And are we just going to go, it must be gone? It is lame, thank you. According to Pastor Jonathan Mayhew in 1749, no government is to be submitted to at the expense of that which is the sole end of all government, which is the common good and safety of society. That's what government is established for, at least the republic government. Now, if you want to go into communism, socialism, it's not established for the people. It's established for the leaders. So, courage versus cowardice. We waited for our judges in Supreme Court to stand up. We were hoping legislatively that this would resolve, weren't we? Okay. So did the judges in Supreme Court stand up? They didn't. Did our governors stand up? Because the governors and electors could have stopped it, because they could have said, especially in the battleground states, there's inconsistencies here. We're not going to certify the vote until we figure out what they are. But they didn't. That's called cowardice. When you're unwilling to take a look at a problem, it's cowardice because you're hoping somebody else will take care of it. I don't want to be the one because I'm afraid, okay? Did you know one of the governors, I think it was the governor of Georgia, his daughter's boyfriend was killed in an accident like 2 or 3 days before he was supposed to certify the vote. Yep. Pastors and leaders, we waited for them to take courage. We're still waiting for them to take courage. Where are the courageous? Why do we think as Christians it was a good idea to get out of government? Why? I mean, we did. Let's just be honest, we did. So we bought into the church and state thing, separation. We bought into, well, I'm just going to be involved about the church. We're just going to win the lost. It sounds good, doesn't it? It does. Sounds really good. We talked to a pastor recently, had a private meeting with him, and we're just talking about his stand, about why are you not talking about these issues from the pulpit? And he said, I'm just not going to get involved in politics. Well, let me ask you, is the fact that they are now trying to force your dollars to go to abortion, is that politics or is that just real life? Okay, the fact that they're closing down businesses and saying you can't work, your church can't open, is that politics or is that just real life? Okay, where are the courageous? Because if we're not going to stand up and talk about the things that actually affect the sheep, the people, then in my opinion, we're being cowards. Well, this is what the Bible says about cowards. Revelation 21:7-8 tells us the rewards and dangers. Those who overcome will inherit all of this, the kingdom of God, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. That list is started with cowards. That was shocking when I saw it. Because, of course, we think murderers, idolaters, witchcraft, but cowards. Is it really worth it to be a coward? We are told to overcome. We are called God's children. Those who overcome will inherit the kingdom of God, and God said we will be his children. How do we overcome? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And we are not to love our lives unto death. Now, this is the deal. If we choose, as Peter and John, as Paul, as others from days of old, to oppose certain things in our government, and again, this is not a call just to be rebellious. This is a call to follow after godly mandates. If you make that decision, either individually or as a state, you do have to recognize that there will be consequences more than likely. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made the decision, I'm going to stand even if it costs me my life. And it did, cost him his life. Corrie ten Boom said the same thing. It didn't cost her her life, but she knew it might. So it doesn't mean necessarily you will lose your life, but you have to be willing. And are we to love our lives unto death? Because this is the thing. Somebody said to me, you shouldn't say that. You might go to jail. Okay. Because you know what? My higher mandate is God. And he said we're to be watchmen on the wall. And if we don't speak out, the blood is on us. If we speak out, the blood is on them. So he has told us even in that verse, which is in Habakkuk 2, we are to speak out. We are to have courage. And not to do so, we carry blood on our hands. We are to speak out. We are to have courage. We are to stand up for righteousness. But we want God to step in and do it all for us. Now, how many of you guys watched the inauguration? I will admit I did, not because I wanted to, but this was my thing. Open up the ground, God. Just open up the ground. Just open up the ground. I'm just being honest. Put their hand on the Bible if it was a Bible. I'm like, God, now's a good time. Let me just tell you. Exactly. But God's ways are higher than ours, and that's probably a good thing. Okay? But we want God to do it. But let's look at Numbers 13. Numbers 13, Moses appointed the spies to go into the land, right? These were not just any people. These were leaders from each tribe. So these were the cream of the crop, all right? And so they went in. They all said, yeah, this is a good land. Absolutely. Because God said what? Go in and take the land. He already told them the end result. Moses sent them in to scout out the land. And most of them came back and said, we can't do that. There are giants in the land. We are as grasshoppers in their sight and in ours. And they were, because they were cowards. But Caleb came back and said, he silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. For those of us today that will be Caleb's, and will see from God's aspect, which is, you need to go in and take the land. What happened for Caleb? He went in and took the land. He got to go into the promised land. For the rest, God promised the promised land to all of them. How many got to go in? From that group, too. Now, their kids got to go in, but they didn't. Why? They were cowards. The men who had gone up before said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than us. They spread a bad report, fear, about the land they had explored. Okay? What are we spreading now in the news? Fear. It's all about fear. If you don't wear your masks, you're going to die. If you don't stand 6 feet apart, you're going to die. If you don't get the vaccine, you're going to die. You're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. Okay, well, you know what does the Bible say? Don't love your lives unto death. So for me, I'm not telling people what to do with the vaccine. I think that's everybody's own decision. What I'm saying is, do the research. What about your own situation? I can tell you for our family, we're a relatively healthy family. From what I see in the research, there's things in it that I would not want to put in my body. Not to mention, there's a very high-level doctor in our city, in our area, who is a specialist in thank you. So that's he's very pro-vaccine. That's his area of expertise. And he told his staff, he didn't make this a public statement, he told his staff, and that's how I learned of it, absolutely do not take this vaccine. There is not enough history. We don't know what it's going to do. It's dangerous. Okay, that was enough for me and the research I did to go, it's probably not for us. All right, you can do what you want. But what are they using it for? To produce fear. What have we learned also about vaccines in the past? Did you know, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, that a group went into the Pentagon and they had researched how they could weaponize a vaccine. And it would target what they call the God gene. The God gene is the part of your brain that allows you to have a belief in God. It's actually a gene. This vaccine would kill it. And they said, now we wouldn't use this on anybody else but the Muslims because they're so radical, right? So that's okay to use it on them as a weapon. We wouldn't use it on anybody else. Now, who's going to believe that? And they have continued to develop that weapon. Would you take the vaccine? Do you really know what's in it? So God promised them the promised land as he promises us a promised land. But they were required to do something to obtain it. Our current battle in America has always been about the remnant and those who will stand. So 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him firm in the faith. Are we resisting people? Is this about people? This has always been a spiritual battle. But those who want to follow demonic mandates, they are resisted because we're resisting what's within them. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand or resist in the evil day, having done all to stand firm. Now, what are we supposed to do? It says in Micah 6:8. It's very clear. He has told you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you. But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Let's talk about do justice. It's an action. It's an action. How do we do justice? It says, the voice of the Lord will call to the city. It is a sound of wisdom to fear his name. So we're called to fear his name, and that's wisdom. And he said, is there yet a man in the wicked house, along with treasures of wickedness and a short measure that is cursed? Can I justify wicked scales and a bag of deceptive weights? The word deceptive there says fraud, intentional misleading by distorting or withholding truth. What do we see in our day? Can we justify, go along with, approve of, congratulate unjust scales? According to the Bible, no. So do you see when someone comes in to Romans 13 and they say, you're just submit to all governing authorities. But what they're doing when they take verses 1 and 2 is you have to ignore verses 3 and 4. The Bible does not contradict itself. Ever. We just have to compare it to itself. It says we are to live as free people and do not use our freedom as a cover-up. We are to live as God's slaves, not government slaves. We are showed proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. Now I will say this. There is an honor that even if you cannot honor the person, you honor the position. We don't understand that a lot of times. We don't talk about honor in such a way. We honor position. Now I'm still praying about that one because this is the deal about Biden. He is in a position that he stole. So I don't even know what to do with that right now, and I don't even know how to speak into it, so I'm not. I'm just saying I'm not going to be a name caller of him on social media because whether I like it or not, he is in that position, truthfully or not. And so I think we have to be careful as believers what we do with that. So I'm just going to throw it out to you. This is what the Bible tells us. Now, constitutionally, we have to remember, in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by said compact, the states who are parties, therefore, have the right and are duty-bound to interpose for arresting the progress of evil. Now, how do we do that in today's? I've had people come on all the time. They're saying, well, what are you saying? What are you saying? Okay, well, I'm saying first, here's just some practical steps. We can recall. Right now, there's a recall going on for Governor Newsom in California, and rightfully so. The people of the state, both conservatives and liberals, are fed up because he's shut down their states. He's shut down their churches. He's shut down their restaurants. He's shut down their businesses. They're fed up. It takes 1.5 million signatures in California. It's different everywhere, so you would need to know what happens in your city and state. 1.5 million signatures. As of last week, they had 1.2. They are going to get the signatures. Newsom now is backpedaling like crazy because he realizes he's about to get removed. You know what? The fear of God comes on them, not because they fear God, but they fear for their positions. It's the first time he's been challenged. Well, you know what? Good for California. And my thing is, go after Pelosi next, go after Adam Schiff, go after Barbara Boxer, go after Maxine Waters, go after them. Every single state, that's our sovereign right. We need to find out, we need to begin to form groups so that we know when we need to go get signatures, because let's talk about it, it's time consuming. But if we had groups already put together, that they knew each group had a certain part of the city that you were to go get signatures, and if we have enough people, then maybe you only have to cover 3 or 4 blocks. That's not very taxing for anybody. If you have to cover 4 cities, that's extremely taxing. So this is about people coming together to go, I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to what? Do justice. What is justice? Removing unjust scales, removing corruption. That's where we start. You can, just for the record, for those who don't know, you can remove, by recall, governors, mayors, representatives. You cannot remove a senator that way. Okay, they're protected under different rules. They can be removed by the vote, but Kevin looked this up yesterday. They can be removed by their own house. So if we actually removed the ungodly senators and the ungodly representatives, then they can take action within their own houses to remove the others. Do you see how it works? So King Nebuchadnezzar said, when you hear the sound of the government, you know all that. So there was this ungodly mandate that you have to bow down to me and worship the statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown in the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your God or worship the image you have set. They were still honoring of an ungodly king. Do you see that? They weren't cussing him out. They weren't calling him names. They referred to him with the respect of his position. They honored his position even as they refused to submit his authority. I think that's really an important word for us right now. Submission to authority Well, we need to remember who is in authority. Are they submitted to God's authority? Are they God's servant for good? And do we follow earthly laws that contradict biblical laws? So I've already talked through what are some of our action steps. Go talk to your pastor. Go talk to your mayor. Go talk to your governor. Who was it that said yesterday, that was, Rick. Rick and Eloise were here. I don't know if you guys know them. They're part of your body. And he is working with state government. And he said he had heard from one of the officials that the thing that trumps everything is if you actually go talk to your official face to face. The next place would be a phone call. And then the next place would be an email. You know, the lowest is sending them a text. Because a text means they probably represent one or two people. If you send an email, you maybe represent about 100 people. But a phone call or going to see them face to face, they're really going to take notice. Okay, you know what? We may have to take off work to go do that. We have to take some time to go do that. I understand that. I never said this was going to be easy. I just said it's right. We are to do justice. And so I've heard a lot of people say, you know, I just can't do that. I work. Okay, well, do you want a godly government or do you want a tyrannical government? Because these are really the questions we need to ask ourselves. This is going to take time. We need to band together. We need to form committees. We need to talk about what we do. We need to be able to go out and get signatures. Okay? We need to help educate others on a true foundation of a constitution. Oh, and this is what I told the group yesterday that came. I was talking to one of our congressmen, state congressmen, and he said if 5 people contact him over a bill, he might change his vote. And I said, how can 5 people change your mind? He said, because I know those 5 people represent a much greater amount because so few people ever contact me. How sad is that? That we don't contact them. We need to recognize the states were to have more power than the federal government. We need to get that put back in its right place. And if your governor is not taking action, you need to go talk to him. And my suggestion is that going as a group can sometimes be very effective. But we don't go, remember, challenging. We honor their position, but we have a discussion. And there's a way to have a discussion without being belittling, demeaning, name-calling. We need to remember that. We have really regressed as a nation into this whole name-calling kind of thing. It's not what we do. And so I also encouraged Pastor Ed, I said, take a group in and then ask them, how can we pray for you? What are your greatest needs? You know, people begin to melt when they think you really are going to pray for them. This is a time where I believe God is going to call some of you to run for office, to run for school boards, to do things that you never thought you would be doing. And you will be going, arguing with God, just like I was. But let me tell you, it is futile to argue with God. You can either obey or disobey, and that's really the choice. And obeying is so much better. So if you want to have an exciting life, I would encourage you, just ask God, what do you want me to do now? And then see what he says. Thank you.
Yeah.